What's up, guys? mcstu here, and today we're going to take a look at the Kelvin Timeline Intel Dreadnought Cruiser. It's a mouthful, also known as the Vengeance. Now, I was cycling through some ships that were, in my roster that I hadn't looked at in a while, and I ran across this ship, which I hadn't played in quite a while. And this ship is a very popular ship. It's a very old ship. This was added to the game prior to me even starting it. And I started thinking to myself, there's been a lot of changes with ISO mags and other gear. How does this ship hold up today? It's a beautiful looking ship. It's super popular. And so I thought it would make sense to, kind of talk about the ship itself. Is it still worth getting from the Lobby store? And, what kind of performance can you expect out of it? I will just briefly go over the build that I have on it. It's not going to be a super in-depth build video. I want to talk about the strengths that it has, weaknesses, things like that in today's current game with the gear that's in game and all the power creep. So we will start with taking a look at the build. So the most common build that we would see on this in the past was going to be cannon scatter volley. And it always kind of bummed me out a bit because you couldn't do CSV or cannon scatter volley 3 on the ship because it only has a tactical with a maximum seating of lieutenant commander. And you could only put so many of the fleet consoles, Spire consoles on this. I mean, you can still get, 6 of them packing those in. But with the advent of ISO mags, you can have a maximum of 7. And as it sits right now, 6 ISO mags far exceeds 6 of the Spire console, tactical consoles. So that was one of the big things that when I was looking at it. And the nice thing about ISO mags is that they've really expanded what you can do in terms of performance with a lot of ships that you weren't able to do before because they were engineering heavy. We would generally fill them up with, lots of universal consoles and less in the way, obviously, of TAC consoles because you didn't have that room available to you. So let's do just kind of a quick overview of the ship. I'm sure many of you guys have this and are somewhat familiar, but if you're newer to the game and this is something that, you're interested in, this will be the video for you, and I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised. So it's a 5.3. Pretty standard kind of a Dreadnought. It has a hangar bay, which is okay. If you can get pets that have, debuffs and things like that on them, then it's very helpful. But if it didn't have this, the ship wouldn't be a deal breaker. We have 5 engineering slots stock, and then this has been upgraded to the X2. So I have the 2 extra universal slots, 2 science, and 4 tactical. Now, prior to ISOMAX coming out and needing to use, or, having to use, not really having a choice in terms of using the colony consoles, and I apologize, I always say colony consoles and I'm not sure why, the fleet Spire consoles, this ship was still a pretty darn good ship, especially for being able to get from the Lobby store. It's not a lockbox ship, but it's still a premium ship. On paper, it looked kind of okay, but I got some of my first, kind of records, if you will, in this when I was really just kind of learning the game and how to build, and it performed very, very well with CSV. I decided to go with Fire at Will. I've been playing with Fire at Will quite a bit more and finding that I'm being able to just get a ton out of it. It's a lot easier to use to a certain degree than what you would have from Cannon Scatter Volley, in my opinion. It takes a little bit more precision with using dual beam banks, which I went with on this, but on some of the other builds that I've been experimenting with Fire at Will, beams are super easy because you just got to get close and, just broadside your ship and you can get everything firing, as opposed to the cannon scatter volley where you really have a narrow firing arc. So with the dual beam banks, we're getting a 90-degree firing arc, which is pretty wide. It's wider than, I believe, most dual heavy cannons. And let's just take a look here at just a dual heavy cannon. So on this, we're getting 45. So we're getting twice the firing arc off of this. And this is just off a standard dual beam bank at 90 degrees. Running the wide angle, we're getting 135 degree. So what that allows for is less positioning and movement all the time to make sure the nose of the ship is pointing directly at a target. And with using a beam firing mode, I can use a maximum rank of that particular firing mode, in this case, Fire at Will. So I have the Tier 3 version of it, and that sits in the Lieutenant Commander slot. So I can get the maximum of the firing mode for this. Now, you can do the same thing with Beam Overload, but Beam Overload being a single target, you're going to get less damage from that. I can attack more targets at one time and really buff that up and do a lot more damage. Most of your CSV is probably arguably the highest damage output, but if you can't run the highest version of it, then that starts to take away from it. Fire at Will would be your second. So any kind of multi-target, you know, it's not an AoE, but, you know, multi-target firing mode is definitely going to net you the most amount of damage. Now, with that is also going to be the most amount of attention, aggro, when you're going into TFOs and running missions. Now, missions, if you're running by yourself, you're obviously just going to be aggro everything anyways. So when you're balancing your build, this build is a super high-end build, so there's really no healing on it for the most part. It really relies on taking enemies down quickly before they can do enough damage to you. Now, I did take this into a couple elites. I went into a random where the team composition was not quite as good, and I did struggle if I was going to build this for a random kind of a situation. In the elite, I would put some more survivability on it. Either DPRM or up the resistance, or have some healing bridge officer abilities in order to give myself some better survivability, or the two-piece disco set. Or you could even mix in colony consoles with this, and that time I meant colony consoles, because you can use the fleet colony tactical consoles with ISO-mags. So you could run 2 of those, you'd have to drop these. But again, I don't want to get too sidetracked with all, you know, the different configurations that I may or may not run for the different scenarios. The point is that this ship can easily do that. And what I'm finding now with the ISO-mags running Fire at Will is that this build is far exceeding the build that I had on it before, where I was using cannon scatter volley. The ISO-mags just, they are very, very good. It feels kind of weird, you know, because your crit chance is quite a bit lower using them compared to normally how you build. Normally I like to be in the, you know, the high 50s on the crit chance, unbuffed that is, and be at, you know, 250 on the critical severity. And again, this is on, you know, obviously the higher end. And I'm still able to achieve pretty good numbers here with, you know, some of the universal consoles and your endeavors and things like that. But being able to stack, you know, your weapons power along with the phaser power or phaser damage boost, it rocks. I mean, these things are just excellent. And on a ship like this, where it's very tactical oriented, other than not having the commander tactical seat, it doesn't have a lot in the way of, you know, your tactical consoles and, as I said, the tactical seat. So with the change to ISO mags and being able to really stack these in, this ship becomes a monster. Let's talk a little bit more about the bridge officer seating here. So we have 2 universal slots, which gives you a lot of flexibility. The way that I configured this is I'm using Photonic Officer for my cooldowns, and the rest of all my science is for an unconventional system proc reset. So unconventional systems, what it does is it allows you, anytime you have universal consoles on cooldown and you use a control ability by a bridge officer, you're going to get a negative 7% to the recharge time of that universal console. So if you're running a minimum of 4, you can really recharge these fairly fast. Obviously, abilities that have a quicker, you know, recharge time are going to be the best. But if you're running, say, Boimler, which helps with the cooldown of your bridge officer abilities, along with Photonic Officer, I'm able to rotate these unconventional systems procs quite a bit. I'm also able to use an unconventional systems proc from the specialization that this ship has. So it has intel, and by using electromagnetic pulse probe, this also gives me a unconventional systems proc, and it has a fairly quick reload time. So I'm able to keep all the universal consoles, which I have 3 of them that are really kind of the core of giving you that alpha damage, on a good rotation and up quite a bit. So even in, say, like a random run, which I did just before starting the video, and let's just pull up the parts to look at it here. This was just on a random run that I did, and you can see, I mean, it performed very, very well. The run wasn't super long, and I was able to use my universal consoles twice. So I used them at the very beginning, and then I used 2 of them once I got to the gate, and the last one on the cube. So I was able to get 2 full rotations in with these universal consoles, which do a ton of extra damage by being able to bump those up. So you can see, I mean, and again, this is just a random run. There's no coordination here or anything like that. And with Fire at Will, we're doing 311. As I said, I did struggle quite a bit doing randoms in the elite category because there's not a lot of survivability on the build. The ship innately doesn't really have any kind of issue with that, and we could up this and probably be getting up the damage resistance and survivability and be getting 500-600 K DPS on runs like that on the average, regardless of what your composition is. I did do a couple runs where I went in with, it was a group of us, Nick MB was live streaming, and so we took a team in. It wasn't a supported run. It was, we had a tank, and then basically everybody else brought whatever they wanted. And let's just take a look at that parse with, you know, having a few higher end builds in there to kind of move things along quicker. Let's see if we can find it fast here. So here's the run that we did last night. And again, this was just a random composition of pretty competent players. So when you have that, it helps things die fast enough. I believe we did have a tank. I think Nick MB was tanking, and everybody else just brought whatever they wanted to. So we're basically all competing for the, you know, for the hit points to be able to take from the damage that we're outputting. And this particular build was able to do 730K in a supported environment. I don't see any real big problem with getting this over 1 million. That might be near the ceiling, at least for me. There's other players that are better than me that would be able to do more. If you were to take, you know, the Gorn Plasma build that uses a trait that adds plasma burn and this other stuff that Spencer's really been pushing, if you were to put that on this ship, you probably could do, you know, much, much higher, especially in the hands of someone like Spencer in between 1.5 and 2 million. Now, these are all massive numbers, and I realize that, you know, most players, and even myself up until a couple years ago when I really started getting into the build side, aren't anywhere near that level, don't have all of this stuff. But what I wanted to really kind of demonstrate is what the ship is capable of, right? So there's lots of budget builds you could put on this without having all of these, you know, more expensive consoles and, you know, some of these more expensive traits. You can still put a budget build. I could put this on my free-to-play account and easily be doing in the mid, probably 250K on a good run. I mean, the composition would have to, you know, just randomly be right. But, you know, even if you're someone that, you know, you just love the ship and you're just kind of putting on the bare minimum, this ship is going to perform. It's going to perform with cannons, and I really think that the Fire at Will is even better for it, but you could do either one of those and be fine. You could also do beam arrays and have no problem doing beam arrays. The ship is very versatile, so it has attract fire, and obviously they all have threatening stance. This is an intel ship, so it doesn't have your command abilities and a command specialization. So you could do like a heavy tank with this, but if you were going to try and do like support with suppression barrage, you couldn't do that. But you could easily do, you know, a beginner tank that could handle elite content with no problem with this. So the ship is very versatile as well. Basically, you're not doing tort builds and you're not doing science builds. Everything else you're doing, and some of these things it's doing very, very well, especially for a ship that's, I don't know exactly when this thing was released, but it had to have been 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, it was a while ago. So this is a relatively old ship that has really stood the test of time. And I mean, let's face it, this thing looks badass. I think it's one of the best looking ships in the game. I don't know if this is a love it or hate it. It probably is, but you know, in most of the conversations and, you know, talking with people, most people, you know, really enjoy the way that they made this ship look, especially from the Kelvin timeline. So ship itself's beautiful. It feels good to fly. It is a Dreadnought, so it doesn't handle obviously as good as what you would get from, you know, even a cruiser or, you know, anything smaller than that. But even, you know, with this particular build on it, I don't have too much trouble. And through the video, I'll be popping up just some, you know, shots of this thing flying along. So it doesn't turn awesome, but it's also not terrible from that standpoint. But again, it's a Dreadnought, so, you know, it is what it is. It comes with the territory. So let's just go through the build just kind of one more time, just kind of taking a look at it. If you guys are interested in some build videos on this ship, I'd be happy to, you know, put together a, you know, maybe a high end and then also with some other options. But just to kind of quickly go over it, we're using mostly dual B banks up front with 3 pieces of rep gear. So the wide angle phaser, we're using the Terran Task Force, and we're using the Dark Matter. We're using the Fleet, and just to be clear, I'm using a censored link, but you could use any kind of dual, you know, beam bank here. Obviously, this is a phaser build. We're using the Colony Fleet deflector for the crit chance, crit severity. We're using the Rep competitive engine. There's some variations of this engine. If this stuff's all new to you, check it out. Go to your Rep tab. Take a look at some of the gear if you have it unlocked. There's also a lot of videos on all of these particular pieces, not to mention the Stow Wiki, which I'll link that down in the description. Every piece in the game is located on that site. It gives you a full detailed account of what it is and where to get it. For the core, we're using the Tholian core. This came from an event. Most people, or not most people, but there's new people or people that skipped it that wouldn't have that. If I didn't have this, like on my free-to-play, I would be using the Disco mycelial, I'm not even trying to say that next word. Anyways, the two-piece of the Disco. So it's the Discovery Rep, Shield, and the Warp core, and that gives you a ton of survivability by having both of those. Again, check it out on the Discord if you want all the details on how and why that works. In the back, we're using 2 Omnis, and these two pieces here are actually the same kind of they come from the same set, but they only count one or the other with the second piece if I had it on here. So if you had these two trilithium pieces don't count as a 2-piece set because you have to do like a weapon and the console, which I'm not using. But both of them do have an innate proc on it that can give you a +10 firing cycle haste, which is really nice for 15 seconds. Both of them do have a chance of proccing that. So they're both on here because I can't put another Omni on there, and the board cutting beam, that would definitely be an option if you wanted to have that on there. I just figured having the turret on the back, it's firing and potentially getting me that proc to go off. It is a low chance, but it's kind of filler, and I think it's kind of the best case scenario for something like this. We're running 6 ISO mags along with the Lorcator, as it's called. This is a rep gear piece. This is a 2-piece with the torpedo that gives you a stacking critical severity. It comes from the Disco rep. Next, we're running Domino. This comes from an event ship, or if you didn't do the event, you would have to get an epic Phoenix token to get it. It comes off the Bajoran Interceptor, I believe. This is here for the huge boost to firing haste, bonus damage, and recharge to the bridge officer abilities. Next, we're using the Emulating Phaser Lance. This all by itself just does a ton of damage, but it's also boosting phaser. And every time I use a universal ability, I'm getting Universal Designs, which is a starship trait to proc, and that's giving us a big stacking crit chance and crit severity. So it's kind of a twofer here. If you didn't have this, but you had Universal Designs, you could use the Space Crystals, because that's something you can continually kind of click over and over and keep Universal Designs up. Next, we have the Flagship Tactical Computer. This comes from the Odyssey ships. I got this off the Legendary because the Legendary ship has all of the different consoles. You could also use the other one. What is it? I think it's also a flagship one. It gives bonus damage. Let me just find it here, and I'm probably spelling it incorrect. I think it's in my inventory. My inventory is a disaster. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this would give you, similar to DPRM, kind of a boost to bonus damage, but I've found through the couple tests that I've done that having this console is better with the fire haste and gives you a little bit of maneuverability. That fire cycle haste, if you can fire that much faster and you're stacking it with other things that are making you fire faster, then you're talking about exponentially upping your damage output. So instead of one shot just boosting that by 50%, you're going to fire 30% faster, along with these other consoles that give us these fire cycle haste. So I mean, if we add all 3 of them up here, we're at what, 30, 40, and the last one, so we're like 70-something% fire cycle haste boost, which is huge, along with some starship traits. So you're going to get a lot more out of that. Next, we're using the M6 computer. Again, you'll need to Google this, but it comes from a ship that you can get with dilithium from the ship vendor. It's fairly cheap. It's 60 or 80,000, depending on your fleet discount. Again, just throw that into the wiki. It'll tell you right where to get it. This here is kind of your budget version of this. The Domino, which the Domino is hard to get. I mean, getting a Phoenix, epic token these days is seems non-existent or impossible. But so this is a good option if you don't have this. If you have both, using both on this build is what I like to do. I'd probably drop one of these maybe if I was going to go a little more survivability for something else, DPRM or some other kind of survivability console. Next, we're using the Bio Neural Infused Circuitry, and this is just to add to the crit severity. Again, we're not really focusing into that, but I'm just finding by still having a halfway decent amount of critical chance and severity along with traits that boost it, mixed with the ISO mags, it's just insane. Then lastly, we're using the Agony redistributor, and this is giving us some flight speed, inertia, but it's really here for the clicky. So you click this on a large target, the damage that you do starts to affect the other targets around you, and you can get really good numbers out of this thing if you're hitting it hard. So generally when I go into do a boss fight, if I have all my consoles up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the agony console, activate it on this large boss, and I'm going to activate all my large buffs and then start hammering it, and anything that's around it is going to get killed. It's a very good console. It comes off the animate. These are just here for filler. I'm probably going to change these out, so do what you want here. Or I think Augie has a like best of pets, and he goes into some good detail on that. So I check his channel out for the pets. There's definitely better ones to put here. I had put these here for focused assault, but I'm not 100% if the focused assault actually benefits me or not here. So if you know, let me know in the comments on that. For skills, I'm using the same tech tree that I normally do. I have a whole video on that. We're using Strategist and Intel. For traits, we are using ETM, or Entire Tactical Matrices. This is from and I can see the ship and I can't think of it. Throw it into the wiki. But this is what we're using to extend the fire ability, Fire at Will. So basically we're rotating between Fire at Will 3. When that's up, we're using Torpedo Spread, which also gives us Fire at Will 1. So we're able to keep Fire at Will up pretty much 100% of the time. Comes from the Gargarin. That's what it is, the Gagarin. Next, we have Emergency Weapon Cycle. Every time that we hit emergency powered weapons, we're getting a big boost to the fire cycle haste and reducing our weapons power cost, which is great because this build with IsoMags is really built around having a huge weapons power. So I mean, if we take just a quick look, not to get too sidetracked, we're sitting at 169 weapons power, and that's really where the boost comes from this. Don't ask me about all the math, but the way that weapons power works is it's like a final modifier that's somewhere in between Cat 2, Cat 3. Don't quote me, but it's not the same as just a bonus or a base, boost to the weapons damage that you have going out. Next, we have Terran Goodbye. This is off the Terran Warship. This is here for the stacking critical chance. Again, Universal Designs. This is off of the Discovery refit, or the Crossfield refit. I got this with one of my event campaigns. Calm Before the Storm. This comes off of... let's jump back. And I'm trying to go fast, guys, so this isn't too long. If you missed something, just rewind it. This is giving us a stacking boost to our critical chance, critical severity. It stacks 5 times, so basically we can get an extra 10 critical chance and an extra 50% critical severity. And I can keep this up all the time by using the emulating phaser lance that we discussed earlier. And again, if you don't have that, you can use the Space Pavo crystals. They come from an event if you happen to have that. Or if you're just good at managing universal consoles, every time you activate a universal console, it gives you a stack of this. And the reason that, just to clarify, that the emulating phaser lance and the crystals are good is because this has 6 charges. So I can keep firing that until those 6 charges are up. This lasts for 20 seconds. And, as you're cycling through, you're not like firing this every second that it's off cooldown. So you're refreshing it every time, and you basically can continually fire this enough to keep this up 100% of the time while you're in combat. Calm Before the Storm comes off of it's a Cardassian ship, one of the smaller ones. I think it has hangars. And again, I'm sorry, guys, I'm just pushing through this. Just throw in Calm Before the Storm into the wiki. But this is here for the stacking, or it stacks up and gives you a huge amount to fire cycle haste. It's a very good trait. Good for cannon scatter volley and fire at will. We want that fire cycle haste to just be going. All right, what do we got next here? Overpower, overgunned. Again, this is giving us a reduction in our power cost to our weapons, so we're not losing out as much there, and we're getting a fire cycle haste. You kind of see a theme here with this, and this would be very, very similar if I was doing a cannon scatter volley build, except I would have the extension trait for cannon scatter volley instead of the entwined tactical matrices. Last, we have Ruin of Our Enemy, and I cannot remember where this is from at all. Again, throw it into the wiki. This is one of the best traits in the game if you're able to, be getting a lot of kills. Once the damage starts getting up high enough from just your base build and other things, this becomes huge. You get a stacking bonus damage that can stack up to 100 times, and you get 3. So if you were to kill 100 enemies, which is a lot, you would have 300% bonus damage, which is insane. You also get a reduction to the recharge time to bridge officer abilities. This trait is really, really good if you're doing a lot of damage. If I was to put this on one of my free-to-play accounts, it just doesn't have a real great build, and I normally go a lot more kind of tanky, so I don't die, I can get through the content, it just takes longer. This trait wouldn't really do a lot. But as soon as you start to get to the point where you're doing 100K or more in a ISA, and we refer to that a lot because it's a good kind of repeatable test map to just get a good idea of the progression of a build. Once you start getting to 100K or more, this trait's going to do really well for you. I'm not going to go through all just the minor details on here. Again, I'll do some build videos for you guys. Stations, we kind of talked about this already. It's basically uncom procs and recharge when we're looking at our science abilities. The rest of it doesn't really do much other than turn off tractor beams from the Borg or whoever you're going up against. On this particular build, they're here to just recharge our universal consoles and our bridge officer abilities. Pretty standard, excuse me, on the tacticals. We got torpedoes because we have to rotate between our torpedo firing mode and our torpedoes. And just remember that if you're going to use the entwined tactical matrix to extend fire at will, you do actually need to have a torpedo on it. It will work without having a torpedo, but you'll have downtime because you won't be able to click this again for the full duration of its cooldown unless you fire a torpedo. So you're at 20 seconds. So if you fire a torpedo now, this will go off of lockout and your cooldowns will cool it all down. Even if I don't fire a torpedo, the cooldown will get all the way back to 0, but it'll still be locked down because I have a spread sitting here for still 15 seconds. And you can see that even with no cooldowns going right now, I got 10 seconds left on it, and this is almost off of cooldown. So just make sure you have a torpedo in front and you are actually firing it. We're using redistributed targeting. This spreads the damage around a little bit. It's really just filler. Chemosite lace weaponry, very good, especially with the dark matter torpedo. If you can really time those out. I have mine onto the spam bar, so it's just kind of luck of the draw. I did try doing torpedo spread, chemosite, putting it here, and then manually firing the torpedo, and I did get a lot more for chemosite. It just wasn't as fun for me to fly. It's maybe something I just need to practice, and it would be a lot better. But if you can really time that out, not having it on the spam bar, you can get a lot more out of that. You just need to be really careful about focusing down too much on one singular thing on the build and then neglecting the rest. And that's kind of what I was finding was happening. I was focusing on chaining these together and I wasn't, firing off my uncons and other things like that. So with some practice, that would be a way for this build to be even better. Lastly, on the tacticals, we have the attack pattern beta, and this is for the debuff that it adds to your weapons. It's really the only kind of debuff that I have on this ship. There's a lot of other things you can mix in, like the trait that's coming off of the event ship that we're currently, grinding for. That trait's got a very nice debuff on it currently, the way that it works. You could be running that trait and, putting something else here, or running both for both the debuffs, and that will exponentially bring your damage up as well. Lastly, for engineering, we are using emergency power to engines. I have a duty officer that when I click that, it recharges my evasive maneuvers. You can get that out of the Phoenix shop, and it's fairly inexpensive. I recommend picking that up like day one that you get Phoenix, tokens Phoenix tokens, and you can get that. It's in, I can't remember what tier it is, but it's not super hard to get. But basically, this is on cooldown. If I click emergency power to engines, you see that goes right off cooldown. On a Dreadnought like this is really nice to have up as much as possible. Next, we're using emergency power to weapons, and this is giving us some bonus damage, and it's also proccing the trait that we have here, our first one, the emergency weapon cycle, which gives us the reduced power cost and the fire cycling haste, so it's a twofer. It synergizes really well, obviously, since we're getting the bonus damage to our energy weapons, and it's making them shoot faster with the trait, and it's making it cost us less in power to our weapons. Next is override subsystems, and this here, when you click that, it's going to give you a big old boost to your weapons power. So right now we're at 169. If we click this and we jump right over to it, now we're at 214. It does diminish over time, the effect, and you do have to bear in mind that when it ends, there is a period of time where you can have a random you will have a random subsystem offline for 5 seconds. That can be a bummer if it's your engines or your weapons right at the right time or the wrong time. So you need to make sure you're managing that, know that that can happen. If you wanted to offset that, if you also had, say, engineering team in one of these slots, that's a way that you could manage that by using engineering team. That would get rid of that debuff that is on your ship. Lastly, we are using, and we talked about this already, it's another uncom proc. It's a intel ability. It's a very good one. It recharges quickly, and it helps cool down our consoles. So that's pretty much the build, guys. Again, I didn't want to go like crazy into detail on that because I really wanted to talk about the ship itself and if it's worth still owning and using. And the answer to that is 100% yes. This thing is a beast. It's been a beast since day one. And with the way that the game has changed over time, I'm arguing it's actually better than it ever has been with the introduction of ISOMags. And you could take this same exact build and put all cannons on it. And really the only thing that I would change on this, just kind of out of the box, is I would change Fire at Will to Cannon Scatter Volley. And then I would go over to the traits here and I would get rid of ETM since that's for our Fire at Will. And I would replace it with the trait that extends Cannon Scatter Volley, which is Withering Barrage. You can get this trait actually for free if you have a Klingon recruit, one of the special recruits, and you unlock it. And then if you have a Klingon that's level 65, you can fly ships that are cross-faction. So then you can basically claim this on a Fed character if you wanted to, and claim this trait by unlocking the mastery on that particular ship. So this is an excellent trait to have, and it's super easy for us to get these days with it being a part of that, that recruitment event for Klingons. So let me know what you guys think. How many of you guys have this, sitting in your ship roster and haven't flown it in a long time? How many of you guys are still flying it, and are you, using ISOMags on it? Even if you didn't have it upgraded, it still sits better using ISOMags than it would using the Fleet Colony or the Fleet Spire consoles. It's an excellent ship, guys, and it's just gotten better over time. There's not a lot of ships that sit like that, but again, with the introduction to this, I mean, a lot of engineering-heavy ships have just gotten good because they've given us options, and that's really, really nice that they've, expanded these and added them into the game. So let me know what you guys think. If you haven't flown it in a long time, I know I did a poll on the ISOMags, and a lot of people were really interested in getting them now that you have those random TFOs that are elite, and it's really easy to get ISOMags. It's not super easy to get the modifier you want, but it is easy to get the ISOMags. So let me know. Is that something you guys are going to give a shot? Again, I think it was like 70% of people said they were likely to run the elites to get the ISOMags. And if you got this ship, this is a perfect ship for these ISOMags. It's a good ship anyways, but it's, like I said, it's just gotten even better. So that's it, guys. It's a, I don't want to say 10 out of 10 because there are some better ships, but I mean, it's a 9 out of 10. This is an excellent ship. It looks amazing. And if you have it and you haven't flown it in a while, pull it out. Give it another shot. Again, with the ISOMags and with the the expansion to having the X2 upgrades. Even if you're not running with ISOMags, you can now fit, which a year ago you couldn't do this. You can now fit 6 fleet consoles on it from the Spire. So I mean, even just that by itself, this ship has gotten even better with halfway decent seating. Cannon Scatter Volley, which most people did. But anyways, guys, I don't want to keep ranting. I love this thing. If you have one, check it out. If you were considering, you're not making a bad choice. Let me know what you guys think down in the description. If you got questions or specific questions about the build or about builds in general, check out the Discord server. There's a link down in the description. If this video was helpful, please hit the thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Helps me out a bunch. Until next time, guys, have a good one. Appreciate you. Hey guys, appreciate you watching. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button, ring the bell, and sub to the channel for the latest news updates and how-to guides.